Hi, this is Michael Collins Piper coming to you from Washington, D.C. I'm here at the Office of American Free Press, and I wanted to talk to you about some really nasty allegations that have been made by a prominent conservative writer against Congressman Ron Paul, the very popular Republican presidential candidate. He is rising in the polls despite what the mass media would have you believe. And now they're finding any way that they can to try to discredit him. The accusation that has been made against Congressman Paul in a recent issue of a very influential conservative magazine, The American Spectator, is that Ron Paul is anti-Semitic. Now, unfortunately, I have been faced with that accusation in my career, and as a consequence of it, I have constantly studied the accusations that have been made against other people. And I'm here to tell you, folks, that I've been following Ron Paul's career for years, and never once has he ever written or said anything that could be construed as being anti-Semitic. Ron Paul has never criticized the Jewish people. He's never criticized the Jewish religion, and yet now they're making this accusation against him. The author of the accusation in the American Spectator magazine is a character by the name of Jeffrey Lord. He served in the Reagan administration as a political advisor, and now he's a very prominent writer in conservative circles, most frequently seen in the pages of the Weekly Standard, the warmongering, neoconservative, and most imperialist publication that was established by Rupert Murdoch. Well, I was interested to see exactly why Mr. Lord says that Ron Paul is anti-Semitic. And I'm here to tell you, folks, I was taken aback when I saw the foundation, or lack of a foundation, for these accusations against Congressman Paul. First of all, Mr. Lord says that in his book, The Revolution, a Manifesto, Ron Paul recommends the book As We Go Marching, published in 1944 by the late John T. Flynn. Now, I've read that book. I've had that book in my personal library for almost 30 years. Now, I want to tell you right up front, there's absolutely nothing anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish, nothing bigoted that appears in John T. Flynn's book. In fact, what's interesting about the book is that Mr. Flynn, who had been a long-time traditional progressive in the old-fashioned sense, but who later became concerned about the growth of government power and influence during the New Deal of Franklin Roosevelt, in that book, As We Go Marching, Mr. Flynn contends that the policies of the Roosevelt administration in the realm of domestic policy were akin to the policies of fascist Italy and Nazi Germany. Now, that is hardly anti-Semitic. If anything, Mr. Flynn's criticisms of Italy and Germany could be perceived as being anti-Semitic. So the very fact that Jeffrey Lord is now saying that Ron Paul has endorsed a book which is anti-Semitic is a lie, a flat-out lie on its face. But it's a little more nuanced than that, and I want to discuss that with you further. Mr. Lord, Jeffrey Lord, in talking about Ron Paul and the late John T. Flynn, points out that John T. Flynn had once written a speech for Senator Gerald Nye, a progressive Republican from North Dakota, in which Senator Nye, who was a critic of Franklin Roosevelt's efforts to get the United States involved in a war in Europe, a position that was shared by upwards of 90% of the American people, including a great many people from both the traditional right and the traditional left, Democrats and Republicans alike, even a few socialists too. Mr. Flynn talks about this fact that the speech had been written for Senator Nye by John T. Flynn. What Mr. Lord found objectionable about Senator Nye's speech was that Senator Nye accused Hollywood movie moguls, and he listed them as having been promoting films that endorsed in some way or another Franklin Roosevelt's war aims. Now, in the course of so doing, Senator Nye, relying on a speech by John T. Flynn, listed the movie moguls. Now, most of these movie moguls happen to be Jewish. And the fact is, as anyone knows, at that time certainly, Hollywood was dominated by Jewish movie moguls. But Senator Nye did not mention the fact that these gentlemen were Jewish. In fact, in the course of his speech, he talked about the fact that there were many Englishmen who were actors in Hollywood who were also part of the war effort, or advancing the United States involvement in World War II. So the speech was not anti-Semitic, and it was not anti-Semitic for Senator Nye to reference the fact that these movie moguls were promoting the war. But you see, Mr. Lord doesn't really tell you that. He keeps that little fact under wraps. But it gets even a little more interesting than that, ladies and gentlemen. And the reason why I know some of these things is because I studied the anti-war movement a long, long time ago and have read many, many books on the topic written by mainstream historians. And what, again, Mr. Lord does not tell you in the course of his attack on Ron Paul is the fact that this John T. Flynn, the very one that Mr. Lord is suggesting is anti-Semitic and that therefore Ron Paul is anti-Semitic because he endorsed Mr. Flynn's book on U.S. domestic policy, what Mr. Lord doesn't tell you is that multiple mainstream historians, including supporters of the Roosevelt administration, pointed out in their own books that John T. Flynn, in fact, was very much a vehement critic of known anti-Semites who may have been at one point or another active in the America First Committee, which John T. Flynn was a leader of in New York City. John T. Flynn publicly, on more than one occasion, denounced some of these people who were perceived, whether rightly or wrongly, to be anti-Semites, and John T. Flynn said that there was no reason to bring the issues of religion, Semitism or anti-Semitism, into the fight to keep the United States out of World War II. In fact, there were a number of prominent Jews, and including Jewish rabbis, who supported the anti-war movement and who were supporters of the America First Committee. Now, again, as I say, Jeffrey Lord doesn't mention any of this. And, you know, it's kind of interesting further, if you want to take a look into the conservative movement of today, of which Mr. Jeffrey Lord is a prominent proponent, you can find that one of the foremost conservative publishing houses, Arlington House, which was part of the sphere of influence of one of America's most respected conservative icons, William F. Buckley Jr., and if memory serves me correctly, Mr. Buckley actually had a financial interest or was a financial supporter of Arlington House Publishers. Well, that publishing house actually issued a friendly and sympathetic biography of John T. Flynn by a woman named Michelle Flynn Steneham, no relation to John T. Flynn. This book was entitled John T. Flynn, An American First. It was entitled An American First, John T. Flynn and the America First Committee. Well, in any case, her book demonstrates conclusively what the other historians had already said about John T. Flynn, that he in fact was an outspoken critic of anti-Semitism. So there you go, folks. Those are the facts. And yet Ron Paul is being smeared left and right, up and down, inside and out, all over the internet, based upon the accusations of this Jeffrey Lord, who is one of the more influential figures in some respects among conservative writers today. The bottom line of it is that Mr. Lord, like many of his associates, is an internationalist. He's a believer in the imperial warfare state. He's a believer in this theme that the United States should be enforcing its imperium upon the entire world. And Mr. Lord, like many of those folks, is very much concerned that Ron Paul is winning support within the ranks of the American public and particularly within the ranks of the Republican Party by enunciating his own forthright and principled position against this internationalism and in favor of ensuring America's sovereignty and nationalism in the face of what many call the New World Order. So there's the facts for you, folks. Get this word out. Let people know the truth. No, Ron Paul is not an anti-Semite. He's just an American who's concerned about America, and he's concerned about America's role in the world. That's the truth, folks. Don't let these phony smears of anti-Semitism be used by these troublemakers like Jeffrey Lord and others among the so-called neoconservatives who would like to stop Ron Paul, because that's exactly what they are doing.